Chapter 20. Mrs. Sowerby Helps Out. By midsummer, the garden was in full bloom. Mary, Dickon, and Colin spent every single day there. One hot morning, Colin was working on a new flower bed when he dropped his trowel. He gazed down at his arms and legs and stood slowly, standing as tall as he could. All at once, he realized something. "Mary, Dickon," he cried, "just look at me." They stopped their weeding and looked at him. "Do you remember that first morning when you brought me here?" Colin asked. Mary and Dickon both nodded. "Just this minute," Colin said breathlessly, "I realized it. I looked at my hand digging with the trowel, and I had to stand up to make sure it was all real. And it is real. I'm well. I'm well." "Oh, yes, Master Colin, you most certainly are." The children spun around to see who had spoken. There stood Susan Sowerby with tears in her eyes, gazing admiringly at Colin. "Mother!" Dickon cried happily. Mary and Colin rushed to her, delighted to finally meet Dickon and Martha's mother. "Even when I was sick," Colin told her, "I wanted to meet you." Susan Sowerby still had tears in her eyes. "Oh, my dear boy," she said, "you look so much like your mother. It made my heart jump. Just wait until your father sees you." Colin looked anxious. "Do you think he'll like me?" he asked hesitantly. Susan Sowerby smiled. "Aye, for sure," she replied, giving him a hug. "And look at you," she cried to Mary. "You look as healthy as my Elizabeth Ellen. I suppose you look like your mother, too. Martha tells me she was a beautiful woman. And you are just as pretty." Mary smiled shyly. Remembering how beautiful her mother was, she was glad to hear that she looked like her. They showed Dickon's mother around their garden, then ate the wonderful lunch she had brought for them. Then they played and sang for hours until it was time to go home. Susan Sowerby placed a hand on Colin's shoulder. "He will be home soon, I'm sure," she said gently. "And it will be so nice that you are the one to tell him. You've certainly worked very hard in making sure of it anyway." Colin laughed. "Every day I think about how I'm going to tell him. I think now I just want to run into his room." Susan Sowerby laughed out loud. "Oh, what I would give to see the look on his face." Miles away, in a beautiful Austrian village, Lord Archibald Craven walked slowly along the bank of a river. He stopped at one point and stared deep into the water, gazing at his reflection. But he turned away quickly. His sad image was more than he could bear. Lord Craven had been away from Misselthwaite Manor for a long, long time. He thought about his sick son back home. Tears came to his eyes. He felt sad and ashamed at having been such a horrible father. He hadn't meant to be. After his wife passed away, he couldn't bring himself to care for the boy. Then, as the years passed, Lord Craven had become more and more miserable and unhappy. One night in the middle of the summer, Lord Craven had a dream. He dreamed that his wife was calling to him. "Archie," the sweet voice sang out, "Archie." In his dream, he answered her. "Lilia," he cried, "where are you?" "In the garden," she replied joyfully, "in the garden." When Lord Craven woke, he felt strange. He had a sudden urge to see the garden his wife had loved so much. He wanted to see the garden he had locked up on the day she died. Even stranger than the dream was a letter he received at the inn that very afternoon. He opened it and read, "Dear Sir, I am Susan Sowerby. You came to me many months ago for some advice about your niece, Mary. Please, sir, I would come home if I were you. I think you would be glad to come home, and, if you will excuse me, sir, I think your wife would ask you to come if she were here. Respectfully, Susan Sowerby." Lord Craven read the strange letter twice before putting it back in its envelope. He kept thinking about the dream. "I must go back to Misselthwaite," he said to himself. "I will go at once."